You're listening to a Pop House Network podcast for developers by developers. Welcome to Java Pop House episode 106. Spring AI and Ollama. So, hey everyone. This is our 106th episode, and we keep going. And I think there's so much to go on, and we're probably going to keep doing more AI stuff as we go through, because that's really where it is at, right? For those who are tuning in, my name is Freddie Gime. I'm one of the distinguished principals here at Expedia Group, author, speaker, Java champion, and Seattle Java user group organizer. And I'm here with my partner in crime, Bob.
Hi, everybody. I'm a senior software engineer at Snowflake, Apache Software Foundation member, Java champion, speaker, and CJUG board chair.
All right. And before we dive into the stuff proper, I wanted to thank our sponsor, Datadog. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a monitoring and analytics platform that integrates with over 450 technologies, including AWS services, Docker, and Kubernetes. Datadog's platform brings together metrics, traces, and logs in one place, so you can get full visibility into your environment and improve your application performance. With machine learning-based alerts, customizable dashboards, and distributed tracing, Datadog makes it easy to unify disparate data sources so you can troubleshoot faster. Start your free Datadog trial today. Listeners of this podcast will receive a free t-shirt once you install the agent and create one dashboard. Visit javapophouse.com/Datadog to get started. And again, that URL is javapophouse.com/Datadog. And definitely give them a try. They are our sponsor, and they have, we're grateful for them that they keep, like the mics on and the beers flowing. So give them a try. All right. Ooh, excuse me. Oh my gosh. Ollama, Spring AI, all this is gonna be super, super fun. So let's kind of like go over a little bit. Maybe I want to start with one of the reasons why I think it's important for every engineer to know this, or at least, I think at some point in time this is going to become almost like, not quite like collections. Collections are super fundamental, but I think it's one of the things that you having it in the tool set of things that you can do or operate within and being comfortable with is going to really help you in your career growth. I think that like the very first part is that a lot of like AI and LLM, it started, of course, in Python, and with a lot of data scientists and machine learning scientists. And they are, at the very beginning, and I guess very beginning is like, what, 2 years ago?
No, it just feels that way because of the media, right? I mean, most of the things and the concepts we're talking about have been around for a very long time. And my perspective on it is it's just scaled up to the point where now it can do some very, very useful things thanks to advances in hardware and advances in the science of how to build these tools. So the LLMs, as far as how they integrate to people, though, and as a developer, that has changed significantly. I mean, if you look at a lot of the neural network based applications that were built before the whole LLM thing kind of exploded, is you looked at very, very task specific networks to do image recognition, so character OCR type activities, classification of images and bounding box. So, you would have basically inputs that would take pixels of images, and they had fixed sizes, and then you would get outputs as vectors of floats, and that would mean certain things, whether that's, hey, this is where the bounding box is, this is the color of the thing. So you had these very, very structured and kind of brittle instruments to work with. But now you have LLMs where it's basically there's kind of almost like you've got your REPL, like you have your chat completions, you have your embeddings for encoding certain things in a consistent way. There's a lot of things and tools now in the ecosystem that I think has made AI more approachable for developers that maybe aren't that fine tuned into exactly what all the input and output um, you know structures are for these things. It's all been abstracted, right?
Yeah, yeah. And that is kind of like the part where is not necessarily something that you need to shy away, but it's an opportunity because a machine learned scientist will create a model or fine tune a model or fiddle with the weightings and all that. But when it comes to running things at scale, like when it stops being a toy and it needs to be something that is part of a system, that's where we kind of like step in, right? Like that is where we like, like it's like, oh, how do I expose this Python ML model? And it's like, no, we don't create web services in Python, right? So that's kind of like the point, like it made a lot of sense, to have scientists trying to come up with these models, but the ones who are going to essentially scale this out and actually make it work for like the company that you work for is you run of the mill software engineer that works in essentially this web service kind of like backend systems and know all these things, right?
Yep.
So
It's not a research project anymore. It is an engineering problem.
yes, and that is kind of like the fun part where like knowing this like these things will enable you to say, hey, you know what, I can take that and scale it out, right? And I think the second incredible opportunity is that, and because I'm noticing this, is that sometimes there is like this tunnel vision, right? Like if you have an AI and ML team that is only dedicated to like research, sometimes they can miss the opportunities that you might notice because you are down in the actual code, right? Like you're down on the internal processes. Oh, I'm slurping documents all day long for this thing, so now I'm like bouncing emails about that, and nobody made the connection that you have a service that is reading customer emails, but but they're not classified, right? Or you can run a classifier, you can run reports, so you can do all these things, right? And it happens because like the people that are working on the ML, they're just concentrated on the shiny thing about chatbots or maybe something else, but they don't realize that there's opportunity to use these LLM models to help you do other things in the realm that you're working with.
Yeah,
So
go ahead, finish your thought.
no, yeah, that's it.
I was going to say that what has come to that industry is a certain level of standardization, and it's not quite in at like the JSR. Hey, we have a spec for that sort of thing, but there has kind of come a general agreement of how you want to interact with a lot of these LLMs through the structure of statements, and I think we'll get into that once we get into the details of system versus user prompt versus assistant replies,
Mhm.
tuning parameters, like a lot of the ways of interacting with LLMs have become a little bit standardized because you release a new LLM, there's kind of an expectation that I'm going to be able to interact with it in a predictable way, in a way that I can kind of plug and play with different models so that I can evaluate them and figure out, hey, which model is the right fit for what I'm trying to do within my company for my project. Because the one of the wild things is they all publish, all of their stats and their specs on how well they do against certain benchmarks. And a lot of times you find that some of these models are highlighting, hey, we're the best at this, and another model's the best at something else. Hey, we're the best at generating code. We're the best at answering questions about animals or places and doing image recognition.
Yeah.
We do zero shot better than anyone. So there are reasons to want to evaluate and be able to plug and play the models into your code to find, hey, what's the best fit for what I'm trying to do for my company? And the standardization through projects like Ollama help us get to the point where that doesn't require an insane amount of investment. Like, because before, when you had different models and different inputs and different ways of interacting with them, it was expensive to swap out the model. Now it's almost free.
And it's so interesting that, like, and I don't know why it happened, but the industry really walked very quickly into a standard that everybody adopted.
It did, like all at
Like,
once.
I
Right?
know that usually this is not the way it goes.
Agree. Yeah, no, that was kind of interesting just to see how it came together very quickly. But like at the same time, that's just the one part that most of the programmers see. I mean, so there's also, the hardware it's running on, the tuning parameters, and there's a lot of stuff in Ollama behind the scenes that as a developer you may not see, but is being worked in that environment, in that code base to allow different models to be running on different hardware, so that you can drop Ollama on your MacBook the same way you would drop it on some big iron with some real,
Like real.
NVIDIA GPUs or clustered GPUs and ways that folks are scaling up these LLM systems. So we're probably going to focus more on the engineering side, but just know that, if you start looking at Ollama, there are things behind the scenes that are also dealing with device compatibility, chip architect, different chip architectures so you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, no, and that is kind of like the it's actually impressive. Like Ollama as a piece of technology
Yeah.
is actually very, very good. But we'd be kind of like you're describing how great it is, but let me go in and start to describe what is it. Because to be honest, like even when you go to the Ollama, it almost feels that I still don't know what this is.
I
So
downloaded it and it was a lot of stuff.
so let's start from the beginning, I guess, or not from the beginning, but like a little bit of background. So like you said, Bob, a lot of these different companies are essentially spewing out different models, right? And one of the things is they agree to that a model is almost like a real thing once you're able to publish it in Ollama, right? Like that is kind of like if you see like the most popular large language models are going to be published within essentially the Ollama kind of like standard, right? And what happens is that Ollama is essentially a service that allows you to execute these models, right? So like essentially when you download and install, it's a piece of software that will then has the ability to run any of the models that are listed here. It's kind of nice because actually Ollama is also a repository for these models, so it works a little bit like Maven, where you can almost just specify, oh, I want to try Llama 3.3, or I want to try 5.4, and you just tell Ollama, I want to download that model, and Ollama will go to essentially the Ollama repository, download it from the internet, and suddenly you have a copy of this model on your local machine.
Yep. I mean, and even go further than that, it's not just Ollama 3 versus Llama 2 versus most of these models also have different classifiers in this repository that says how many parameters am I doing? And that can be very significant depending on what hardware you're running on. So, for example, you're looking at the Llama 3.3, or actually here, the Llama 3.1, I see a couple. There's an 8 billion, there's a 70 billion, and then there's a 405 billion parameter model. Now, each of those models requires a different amount of system resources. So the less parameters, generally speaking, the lower system that you're going to be able to run it on. So if you pull down the 405 billion parameter model and try to run it on a very small, like, Windows Surface machine, you're going to have some problem. You're not going to have enough memory to load that model in. It's going to take forever to download because it's going to be several gigabytes large. So this also gives you some scalability where it's like, hey, you know what? I just want to play around with the model a little bit. So I'm going to start with the 8 billion parameter model, and maybe I'll run that on my laptop. But if I get good results out of it, hey, maybe I'm going to scale up to the 405 billion, running it on a VM with 4 GPUs that all have 64 gigabytes of memory each, just as an example. So I mean, you have this scalable means of swapping these things out for different hardware requirements as well. And it works just like Maven, like Freddie said. You can just add a qualifier, and it will say which one of the models you're going to pull down.
Yeah, no, and exactly right. Like the fun part about this is and a couple of things is, first of all, this is all running in your hardware, right? Like the one big thing about this is that it's not that you have to get an OpenAI API key and license and do all this stuff, or or like you don't have to worry about like things leaving your box, right? Like if you're working with some data that you think is like, hey, I don't want to share this with OpenAI or Microsoft or ChatGPT. The advantage is that these models are running within your hardware, within whatever you put it in there, right? So that's kind of like the third benefit that you have. And the interesting part is that at the very beginning, the models were very big, and even if you can run them locally, it almost required you to have like specialized hardware. But there is so much progress on these things. Like it just looking at this, I did not realize they must have released this fairly when was it, like,
5 weeks ago, yeah.
oh,
Although 5.4 was updated 8 days ago. So I mean, they're fresh. I mean, they get the models fairly quickly after they're released.
yeah,
5.4 is a fairly recent model. We're talking the last couple of months.
8 days.
Since Microsoft released it 8 days ago, it finally dropped in Ollama. At least the latest updated version of the model did.
And the interesting part is that because they're releasing it so quickly, all of them are trying to discover new ways of essentially compressing and running these models on less, powerful hardware, right? I think there is even one here that was I think the Quen, which is like the 0.5, it's so small, but it almost like they can run in like handheld devices like cell phones, right? So and this is kind of like the world is your oyster kind of thing where you can suddenly it's like, okay, I'm gonna try Llama 3 or I want to try 5.4, and you download them, and now they really run decently enough on commodity hardware, right? So let's just go there and show essentially what you do, right? Like for downloading, I'm not gonna download it, I haven't installed already. For Linux, you can just go and do this. If you're running it on Windows, and you have WSL, I recommend go that route, and then you can just use the Linux to actually install it. If you happen to have a GPU card, there is some extra setup that we'll put it on the show notes that you will have to do to install essentially the NVIDIA drivers for your Linux. But GPUs will definitely accelerate.
Dramatically.
Oh, it's like, but if you don't have them, you can still play with this.
It'll
Like,
still work. Yes,
yeah,
that's right.
yeah, it will be
Um,
slower, but you'll be able to play with it. Now, let
the
me see.
other the other option I would add to that is there are also Docker options for running the Ollama server.
Yes.
So if you have cards and you're just looking to play with it, dropping in a Docker container is a great way to experiment with it through either the CLI or the REST interface without installing anything on your local machine directly. Docker's how I use it. So
Interesting. Oh, but yeah, and then you need to install. You need to
The
install the.
toolkit. So you can still use the NVIDIA GPU drivers even through Docker. There's things to install to make that work. But
Mhm.
again, it keeps some things together because, as Freddie mentioned, you're not just downloading the Ollama piece, you're also downloading the models, and Docker gives you a nice way to make sure you get all that stuff cleaned up because it'll put them on storage volumes and things like that. So
Oh
you have a
no!
lot of different options of just compartmentalizing your install with Docker.
Oh, I am Ollama forever, so I have it installed like completely. Let's see if I can share my
Freddie's
screen.
all in.
Yeah, yeah, you can see my screen. All right, so I installed it on my on my Windows system for Linux WSL, and essentially, it allows you to have this Ollama command, that you can then kind of do things, right? So I can do Ollama list to show the models that I have, like we said, Llama 3.2, the 1 billion parameters, and the size. The bigger they are, or the more parameters they have, usually means that they're gonna be larger, and they're going to be technically, usually you start getting quote unquote better results. But like we said, this is such an evolving field that, even like, for example, on the last Ollama model, Llama 3.3, they're claiming that the 3.370 billion offer similar performance compared to Llama 3.1 for 105 billion. So essentially they're saying we managed to optimize and compress more, what we did, so you don't have to essentially get the super big models to get the same performance. But you know so just keep those things in mind. But the interesting part is that with this Ollama, then you can do, for example, I have, like we said, I downloaded like Llama 3.2, and let's just start that one, and then let's see. Actually, let's do 3.2 latest. So I can do something like Ollama run
Yep.
Llama 3.2 latest. And what that's doing is essentially loading the actual model and starting a session where I can say, for example, who are you? Right? And an artificial intelligence model known as Llama. Llama stands for Large Language Model Meta AI, right? So I can ask it questions like, tell me a geeky joke. So yeah, that's so, and the thing is like what you saw there, it's actually using my GPU. The fun part is, let me see if I can, I think if I go, um there you go. I can do Ollama PS. Even though I exited the session, Ollama is still running in the background as a service, and it kind of keeps the model alive for a little bit after I've stopped interacting with it, just in case you decided to come back, right? But here you can say that, the model size is for 4 GB, and the processor is using 100% percent CPU, and until 4 minutes from now, it's when essentially the cutoff, and it's like, okay, nobody's using the model, I'm going to upload it, right? So, thinking about it that way, when you start with, even when you start in Windows, they install services, and the fun part about it is that, you as an engineer, it's like you can actually understand what's happening behind the scenes, and what's happening behind the scenes is nothing more or less than just a web service. So if you actually, I think, remember what I said. Yeah, it's 1.434. So right now Ollama is essentially serving my local host 11434 address. And here essentially is a web service that is running, that you can actually ask questions about. Like if you see Ollama REST API. These are like kind of like the things that you can ask. For example, if you want to generate a completion, you do a post on API generate, and there is a bunch of like things that you can send. For example, I can actually curl this and essentially, let's see. Actually, let me see if I can share two
Yeah,
things.
no, yeah, that should work too. I mean, the REST API is essentially mapped to all the stuff that you can do on the CLI. I mean, I think one of the biggest things as a developer to realize with the REST API is how sophisticated do you want to get with your results? Because it supports both a streaming and non-streaming response, where Freddy this is a streaming response where it's sending back everything in small chunks. So if you're using a more, I won't say advanced, but a Java HTTP client that supports streaming results, you can use the streaming results. If you're using maybe a more simple version where you need all the response to come back at once, you can turn that off and you'll just get a single response rather than a streamed response uh, from the chat completion. So that can be significant depending on which HTTP client you're using, whether you're using a reactive one or not. The very simplest thing, if you're just getting started with this and you don't want to spend a lot of time on your HTTP client, is just to turn the streaming off, and then you get the response
Just
when
as
it comes back, which may take a little bit, especially if you're not running on GPUs like Freddie is. But it allows you to not worry about having to deal with the continuous stream of responses and then reassembling all those things together programmatically on your end. But streaming, a lot more efficient memory wise, a lot more efficient in a lot of ways. But you just have to be able to eat that complexity that's coming from that streaming interface.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's also like a trick of the mind. Like when you're chatting with a chatbot, uh, seeing the thing come through, you almost feel that it resets your waiting time a little bit. Like you're willing to wait for a response as it's coming through versus, 1 minute, like, and both of them will take exactly the same time. But if you type something and you don't see anything coming through, but 1 minute, then you get the whole response. You for a lot of people, you're like, oh my gosh, something crashed, something is going on. I didn't get any response. So it's kind of funny how the brain loves that streaming to it. But yeah, right. So this is kind of like the second layer that we're peeling off, right? Like Ollama, essentially, we know it's a service that you install or you can Dockerize and run, but essentially it exposes a REST API endpoint. And if you really we'll put this on the show notes, but the REST API endpoint essentially is exactly what you expect it to be. If you're listening to the podcast, for a little while, this is kind of like the bread and butter, right? Like there
Yep.
is, get, post, web service, and you can actually do a lot of the prompts that are in here. And maybe that's good enough for you, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna go and start playing with it. I know how to integrate it and do stuff. But I'm gonna be like those like midnight salesmen. But wait, there's
There's
more.
more. Yeah.
So this is kind of like fun because like we are I think that one of the great things about the Java ecosystem is that there is always cool supported features, and we have such a big ecosystem that everybody is there's a lot of choice when you want to write Java and write large language models or try to use these kinds of APIs, right? And like before we dive in, because we want to go with one of the ones that I find the most comfort using, and it's super fun, is Spring AI. But before we dive in, I wanted to close the chapter on Ollama and figure out if we at least touched the main points. I don't know if there's anything else we need to add, Bob, before we actually dive into
I mean,
actual.
so I would add just to what you've already stated. So I mean, your general process in Ollama is so Freddie showed it through the CLI. You're going to download a model. Once the model is downloaded, you can run chat completions, you can generate embeddings, and as well as sending different hyperparameters to those models. So the interesting things that you'll see, and all of this is in the API documentation. Um, but as far as how you interact with the model, all the supported idioms of system, user, assistant, and tool based prompts are available in there for doing your chat completion and your session. If you're having a continuous interaction with the model and you expect there to be some state, hyperparameters, for those models that support, all of those are actually documented in that Maven repository, which tuning parameters are supported for each model. So for example, one popular one is temperature, which will tell you just, basically how kind of liberal the model will get with hallucinations. It's one way to try to control some of those things of how much the model will guess versus, being conservative in its responses. But most of them support dozens of hyperparameters that you can tune on, and it is just tuning options on that REST API in order to get those different results. And the very last thing that I would say about Ollama, that if you made it to this point in the podcast, great, because this is probably one of the things we should have led with, is while Ollama is open source, some of the models that come into Ollama have very different licenses than Ollama. So while Ollama is completely fine and open source, and most companies will have no problem with using Ollama, the models that are running on them, check the terms of those licenses before deploying them in production, because some of them may not work very well with your corporate structure, because some of them have provisions based on how big your company is, how you're interacting with that model, what you're doing with that model, which may put you out of compliance with the model license, even though you're perfectly fine using the source code that is Ollama.
Yes, and that is out of note, like for example, I think the Quen has essentially they have restrictions on the smallest and largest model out of that. They're either going for like the handheld devices or the big iron. But yeah, definitely you do want to check the licenses. Like the advantage that you have is Ollama will allow you to switch very quickly to like a different kind of like model. Maybe you want to start with I think the one that I've seen a lot of people use is Mistral.
Yeah,
Uh,
that one's an Apache licensed model, so that one's fairly liberal license, so you can use that in a lot of different contexts. But like, for example, Gemma, the Google model, and Llama from Facebook, they have some licenses terms that you should read before using them in a production environment. Is all I will say on that. I am not a lawyer, but I would definitely have your lawyers read them before using them. And one more thing I will also put on it, just as a specific thing. When you go to the interface, actually, if you go back, there are specific models in here that handle vision. So if you're doing things with images, the API will show support for sending images to it. But even if the model from the docs you read say supports images, if it doesn't support the images in Ollama, that model will not return results based on images. So you need to make sure that the model is configured as a vision model in Ollama in order to use the prompting with images. So another thing just to kind of keep in mind, like Phi, for example, supports images when you use it, but the Ollama bindings for images, I don't believe are there yet for Phi. They may come in the future though.
Yeah, and I know they have like Llama 3.2 vision. Let me see. Let
Yes.
me.
So some of them have the vision pieces. So depending on your use case, that may be important or it may not.
Yeah. So let me do this. I just gonna start, essentially I'm gonna try to download Llama 3.3 and then let's see how hard it is. And I think I'm just gonna do latest. And just like that,
Oh, good. Freddie's got a fast internet connection. That helps.
but that is kind of like the awesome trick, right? Like this used to be messy.
Oh, I
Like
know.
you have to go to like a university that was hosted somewhere and trying to like find the model. Now it's just I'm downloading Llama 3.3 latest
Yeah.
and it's it's going, right?
Yeah, you have to find the right runtime. You're probably installing a bunch of Python dependencies. Like
Oh
it
God.
really has come a long way. This really has revolutionized how you can interact with models
Yeah.
and experiment very quickly.
So as that is going down, what we wanted to like, or like the one thing we wanted to start talking about is this idea of like Spring AI. So Spring Framework is I made no qualms about it. Like I love it. We use it a lot, and we're in the place I work. And I will collect my $20 from Michael Minoa after this show.
Are you saying he gives you money to promote Spring? Freddie, you do that for free. Be fair.
You don't have to pay me. Like
I like Spring too. I'm a fan.
so the interesting part is that they actually came in and they have like Spring AI as part of their portfolio, right? So that's now Spring AI is they are the funny part is that they are moving fast. So the API is still changing. We're gonna cover to probably the things that are going to be a little bit more stable. But I notice even between like milestones or snapshots, they are tinkering with it, and a lot is because uh, everybody's moving fast. Like like the support for Ollama just what was adding support for vision, and then Spring AI is like, okay, what does that mean for our like interface? Or Ollama has support for tools, which we're gonna cover a little bit. Uh, and Spring AI is like, oh, Milestone 5 is the one who has streaming tools, right? Like before that you can just do like one shot tools and stuff like that. So that is one caveat that I'll say. It's like it's an amazing piece of software, but it's evolving, so just be a little bit patient. If you're building something that as you upgrade the versions of the Spring AI, you might run into they moved things around, they deprecated some things, they added more things. I think a lot of the stuff that I see uh, more of the changes, it is around tools, and it is around the way they register like all this like rag and helpers and stuff like that. Because like at the beginning they were just doing the very basic thing, and then they figured out, oh my gosh, all these things are common, let's try to extract it and abstract it to a way that everybody like they realize everybody needs to configure it the same things the same way. So it's all good stuff. But let me see if I can start sharing, right? like
Yep.
like you can always go to and Spring initializer. It's available under Spring initializer, which is kind of like if you're doing a greenfield project, this is where you probably want to do it. Like one of the things that usually you want to do is you want to add Ollama as your Spring AI. You do want reactive web. The Ollama, the implementation that they have is based on reactive web. So there'll be a lot of like, and that is they use that because of the streaming. There's a
Streaming.
flux of streams that are coming out. In addition, you do want, and I don't know, and this is probably some of the things that I'm saying that are refactoring. As of now, you still need the regular Spring Web. They have some of the regular, like not web client, but the other one, the REST templates. They still have some stuff running on REST
Oh,
templates.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
it might be completely removed, but for now, like, I just add it. And the reason why is like, like the question mark here, or the reason why, like Bob raises eyebrows, like interesting, is because technically Spring Reactive Web and Spring Web both achieve the same thing. They are technically kind of like libraries that allow you to describe essentially REST services. One of them uses the new reactive framework, which we have covered, in our podcast, probably like 10 episodes ago. And Spring Web is a more traditional. You have a REST template, and you kind of describe it more on like imperative, like you will do this, you will send a request, I'll wait for the response, and then continue going, right?
Yep.
So so that's why, like, it's a little weird, but it doesn't harm anything. Just add them in. We're going to do like reactive web, um uh reactive web as part of what we're doing, just because that feels more comfortable now.
Yep.
And it's super easy to like expand that mono chain, which is a discussion for another day about, like, with virtual threads and all that. Now that they are definitely here, do we really need the reactive web? But
Well, stick to your original statement about just streaming in. It just looks more natural for an LLM to come back and streaming. There are memory um, advantages to doing it that way rather than holding the whole response in memory and shooting it across one shot and waiting for your timeout to expire. So definitely some great reasons to use streaming when it's available, especially for some of these LLM projects. So I would completely agree, regardless of what Project Loom may do to it. There's some good reasons for that, for having
all
that
right.
streaming support.
So I'm sharing now my actual like project, right? Like essentially what happens is that once you do the Spring Initializer, you kind of like end up with the Spring Boot application, and
Standard. Yep.
standard. And here's what I'm going to be doing. Like, I'm going to essentially show a command line runner. Command line runners are essentially how we used to program back in the old days, before fancy web services, right? So this is essentially something that will interact with the terminal, right? So a command line runner, essentially you pass, we create a class CLI service that implements command line runner, and as part of that, we'll get essentially the public void run. And in the public void run, you get all the arguments that you pass in as if you were trying to execute this from the command line. And here I just have essentially a loop, right? Essentially, I'm saying that while true, yeah, I don't even have an exit condition, so those run forever.
Great.
The best kind of software, right? So essentially what it's doing is doing a scanner, and scanner is essentially it's a console reader. So anything that I type will go into the scanner. And what I'm doing is essentially saying like scanner next line, which is getting that is gonna get me the string that I typed in. And then what I'm doing it is sending it to our chat client. Now there is a little bit of magic in here. Not magic, but some ceremony on trying to wrap things around um, the 80 column text, that there is a class that responds with buffer, which is the only thing it does. It tries to make sure that once you print something that is more than 80 characters, you do a new line and kind of like puts it back in, because the LLM model does not know how big your screen is. It's just going to give you a stream of text, right? So The interesting part here is that I'm doing essentially a chat client prompt, right? And the chat client is where all this magic happens. And to be honest, the Spring AI made it so easy that that it's almost like really that's all what it took. It just took like 25 lines, and I'm connected to Ollama and streaming things, and that's what it is. So one of the things that we do is as part of the constructor of the CLI service, because we pass in we actually want to receive a chat client builder, right? And the way that Spring works is that if you annotate the class with component, Spring will scan it and essentially manage its life cycle. And it says like, oh, okay, this is a component. I need to create an instance of this class, right? Oh, look, for creating the instance, I need to pass in the check client builder. And then the thing that it will do is that because Ollama, the Spring AI is running, it will know that or Spring there's the configuration means for Spring AI. It will say like, okay, we first need to initialize Spring AI, which is going to give me a check client builder a bean, and then I can use that bean to create this component. So you get the check client builder as part of your constructor, and essentially there, it's super easy. Like the first thing that we do is you give it kind of instructions, and this is what is called like the system prompt. For and this is kind of like the meta things that I was telling, like some of the refactorings that has happened is like, look, everybody needs to give a system prompt to all these LLMs, and they just decided to, okay, we're just gonna make that as a default system thing that you're going to do for any check client that you have. And essentially, what that is a string that gives instructions to the LLM of what you wanted it to behave, right? In this particular case, you're saying, we're saying the checkline builder, the default system, and we're saying you're a useful assessment, and you always end every interaction with a computer pun. So that is essentially our system prompt. And then, then there is this other thing that this is kind of something kind of new that I introduced on I think milestone 3 or milestone 4, advisors. And advisors are these things that kind of help configure how the Spring AI runs these LLMs, right? And one of them is message chat memory advisor, right? And what this is that usually one of the tricks that LLMs have is that they have this concept of context, right? And the context is what helps drive in, kind of like the request and response that you get, right? And one of the things that does happen is if you have a continuous chat uh, chat with an LLM, one of the things that you don't know that might be happening is that essentially you're sending all the previous messages that you have sent to the LLM as one request, because we know like this is essentially like we saw this is an API is actually kind of like it's actually really stateless. And what's happening is like every time it sends a request, it kind of like puts the previous conversation that you have as part of the context that is sent with the request for Ollama. Yep. And the thing is that to keep track of all that stuff that you send, because you want to send it again to give you to continue the conversation, the advisor that the advice essentially Spring AI needs you to give it a clue like how am I going to keep track of all these things, right? And in this particular case, it's a new in-memory chat memory advisor, and that kind of like helps keep track of the conversation as you talk with the Ollama client. The last one I'm gonna defer a little bit. This is functions, which is or essentially tooling, and that is super excited. But let's first just start here, and essentially then at the very end we just say build, and that creates our chat client, right? And now that we have our chat client, it is a matter of essentially sending what we wanted it to prompt to. So essentially, what is the question that we're asking, or the statement that we're sending. And like we said, if you see here, I decided to stream it. And then when I stream it, you can see that the content is really a flux of string, right? And this takes care of all the negotiation of all getting all that stuff that we said that could be gnarly on if you're doing it this manually, of essentially getting that HTTP stream and essentially collecting and chunking and all doing all that. This does it for me. Spring AI is taking care. I get a flux of string, which is mostly super easy to deal with, right? I get them. I essentially saying that for every one of these chunks that I get, send it to essentially add it to the response buffer that I have. And I'm just block last just means that I want to subscribe to this particular flux, and I want you to execute this, and I'm gonna essentially wait until you're done. And with that, let's just click on run so we can see how that looks like real quick.
Yeah, and this is great just because, knowing what you'd end up seeing in the CLI or working with the REST interface, your code after you set up all of those things just comes down to the user question or interaction and the assistant response. All that other stuff, which you end up writing if you don't have this framework, is just done for you. So that's super cool.
So I like to ask, who are you? And
oh, there's your computer pun, right?
Yeah, here to make life. But today's riddle, who am I? If the answer is not a programming function, the answer is a clock. Just like my time function is your last name. Oh my gosh, it went all the way. You know what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me actually make this, because I make my font very big. Let's see if I can make it. Yeah, let's see if that works.
Yeah, that might work better with our with
Yeah,
your screen.
I don't want this to turn into one of those like when you go to the eye doctor and they're like, how many letters can you say? So let's see.
Makes sense.
Okay. What is a mono in Java? Let's see if it knows that. Oh, mono doesn't have referred to mono, which is the name of the open source implementation of the .NET framework for Windows.
Not wrong. Not what you were asking, though. Is this a Microsoft model? Which model are you using?
Programmer so I can give you a more accurate answer.
But now just to walk through the code that was set up in the background. Now, because you have the in-memory chat context set up there, it's going to remember that question. So if you add a follow-up question and say, hey, I want to understand the concept of like a mono in flux, it's going to know that you're still talking about Java, and you're still talking about the other things that happened before, correct?
The concept of mono and flux not be. Oh, let's see. Let's see. Oh, it did. Well, at least it did hit the serial mobile for such an network connection database, or it can be processed in various operations. Transform, combine, filter, and terminate the stream. In a more concise and easier to test code that handles multiple concurrent data streams efficiently. So I guess 0 or 1 value produced. So it did get there, right? And this is kind of like one of those things where you get to put the creative hat, where one of the things that you start learning is kind of like, how do you write good prompts, right? And there is like tons of literature about how you're supposed to write it. Are you, if I'm asking it for solving a problem, do I put the instructions at the beginning and then the content later, or do I put the content first and the instructions at the end? There's a whole lot of kind of like prompting techniques. Like there was, I think, like we were talking on off here, like the career that only lasted for like 3 months was prompt engineering, right? For 3 months you can be a prompt engineer and get like $1 million, but now everybody is a prompt engineer. And that's part of it, right? Like where like just crafting these particular prompts and understanding how they work. It's art that we all need, that we should be very familiar with, right? Like we don't have to be experts, but if you just search how to write good prompts for Llama 3 or Ollama or whoever it is or whatever um, um, uh, LLM that you're using, um, it will it'll be a great addition to your toolbox. Actually,
Yeah, it's no different than writing a good Google query. I mean, the strategies are different, but like the idea that, to get good search results, it does help to know how to structure a proper query in Google. So,
yeah, no, and this is kind of funny because I'm asking which LLM are you, and it says I'm a machine learning model trained to answer questions about the Java programming language. I don't have personal belief, having tricks. My purpose is to help you learn and understand the concepts related to Java programming, which is, you can see that this is the history of the
yeah,
prompt
yeah.
influencing the response, right? Um, but yeah, those are kind of like the things that you kind of like learn with it.
Kind of feels like it quit on the puns though.
I know, right? Did you run out of funds? Oh my gosh, this is so funny. I made it do a system error. Well, it does come with it
It is
does
talking
come.
about the clock though, which is kind of
Yeah, yeah.
interesting.
No, well, so that is the last part I was gonna cover, which is, super, super cool and amazing, right? Like, one of the things that people discovered, as using the LLMs, and actually we should get this out of the way, at the beginning. Um, you know, some people are trying to essentially anthropomorphize LLMs, meaning like they give them this human nature kind of things, right? But when you go down to it, it's essentially um, predictions and tokens that has a lot of math behind, right? So one of the things that happens is that there's no real human reasoning behind it, and that's why like prompt engineering is kind of um, you have to, it's a thing because how do you guide this kind of like stochastic machine that it's all randomness and trying to find out what is the most probable thing that you're trying to ask, right? And the first part is like, yeah, it's not like there's a live human behind this. This is just like just math that works extremely well for this type of case, right? And the interesting part is that people start discovering that these LLMs can start describing things in, for example, the JSON format, right? Like, it can start putting things in an acceptable JSON syntax. And then somebody started discovering, it's like, oh, maybe there's a way for us to help the LLM interact with what they call tools. Now, this is kind of like if you have gone to Perplexity, or even if you have like used like one of like the Bing search engine, one of the things that the models are trained on a set of data, and the set of data usually has a end date, meaning like they might know events up to a certain point, right? And anything that you ask that is beyond that, the LLM just does not have any information to infer, right? Like the funny parts were like, oh yeah, who won the Super Bowl? And it will tell you the winner of 2023 or 2024 when that model was like trained. But the interesting part is that there are some other things that you can do to kind of like extend the knowledge, right? One of them is, for example, what Bob, you have worked a lot with is like RAG and the ability to essentially feed in new context on like a particular topic, right? Like, and this is kind of like an area that is essentially being really leaned on lately. The other thing that they can do is instead of being proactive about the prompt and getting the RAG, the we can essentially train the LLM to ask for help if it doesn't know a particular thing, right? And this comes in the forms of tools. And what tools are essentially, they are quote unquote APIs that you essentially tell the LLM are available for it to consult. And with these tools, then if there's a question that comes from the user and the LLM figures out, oh, I have a tool, maybe I should use the tool to actually ask, answer the question, then the LLM can essentially, springboard, use the tool to get the answer that you wanted, right? Or to execute an action that you wanted. A lot of this is, for example, Perplexity and Bing will have that kind of like tooling where essentially they may not know what you're asking, like what is the current weather in Florida, right? But they may have tools that will go out, get that information, put it in the context, and then they can then reliably tell you, oh, today is sunny in Florida, right? Or in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I mean the concept you're talking about is taking the LLM and making it into more of an agent where it can act on certain things, right? So it has certain actions that it has been trained to reach for. And those actions could be retrieval based, where you're talking about, hey, go out and look for something that you don't have. It could also be action based, where it's like, hey, go do something on my behalf. It's if I'm asking questions about Java, go buy me a book. If you could, if you had built in the APIs for interacting with Amazon and buying things through Amazon, you could have an agent that, based on certain criteria, will go out and do things for you. So it's a big area that folks are exploring right now, because again, the LLMs, they're not perfect, but there are certain contexts where they can be quite reliable and quite useful. So if it's like, well, if I'm getting a consistent answer and I can teach it to act on my behalf, maybe I'll let it do that. I need to be careful with that. But that is where a lot of this seems to be heading, is in the spaces that I can get a good consistent result, not a lot of hallucinations. Maybe I can have the LLM actually doing things, not just answering my questions.
Right. And that is kind of like the interesting part about what Spring AI, and again, that's a part that is being very fluid right now, because they are really trying to support it as quickly as they can, because that's where things get super interesting, right? Imagine that you have an LLM that is essentially maybe reading a document, and it has the ability for it to do a callback for like uploading it to a particular CRM, because that's where it needs to be. Somebody needs to like take a look at it. Or for example, I'm doing this on a different project where I can ask the LLM to add to my grocery list, right? And it's like, oh yeah, just add milks, and or I can, and for example, adding milk to my grocery list doesn't sound like a big thing, but I could ask, for example, I can ask the LLM to add all the ingredients I need to make cookies, right? And suddenly the LLM will say, oh, you need milk, eggs, this and that, and suddenly that makes it to the stuff, right? And it'll be kind of fun, for example, to then say like, look, here's a picture of my fridge. Remove the items that I don't need. Like this, it gets very interesting once you start giving it like the different tools for doing things, right? So in terms of how that works, super easy, right? Like and it's kind of interesting. They decided to call them functions. If you actually go to the Ollama website, they are usually called tools, and you can see that there's models that have been trained for tool support. That's another talk, just like the vision tag. So if you want to use tools, just make sure that you're using a model that have support for tools. But super easy. There's like 5 or 6 different ways that you can define how a tool works. I'm doing the simplest one, which is, you essentially said register a default function, and you say like, all right, function callback builder. I said the function is name is time, and what it does is it essentially uh, it returns. It's essentially a description of gets the current time, and it just does that, right? It creates a local date time now and just returns what the current time is. So for example, if I run this model, and then I ask it, what time is it? It can legitimately tell me what the real time is. So what time is it? That's one way to put it.
Not how most of us would say it, but not wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So it knew that it's January 16, 2025, right? Like if you ask this from an LLM model that does not have access to the tool, you probably get their cutoff date, right? So this is essentially a way to show that it's actually using the tool that I have. Actually, kind of fun. Let me see if I can. I'm gonna breakpoint it in.
We'll see if it actually calls it. Just it almost would have to, right? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it
And
would
and
have
there,
to, because otherwise, again, like you said,
how would it
the
know?
model doesn't have access to your CPU, time function, unless you give it access.
Yep. Yeah, yeah. So there it is. Like a way to easily introduce functions into stuff. And I think one of the things that becomes impressive, the more you start thinking about how these functions can essentially enable essentially actions in the way that your LLM works, right? Like we said, the ability that I'm gonna have Java for Dummies on my Amazon account delivered to my door. But if you think about it, like you may have some kind of function callback for preferences, right? Like let's say that you have a customer service chatbot, and it has the ability to, like kind of like start capturing like things that you like out of that particular, like you say like, oh, this person always likes spirit, or this person always like ordering, this kind of like food, right? um then it becomes an incredibly powerful story because like this is happening as you're just, talking to the stuff, and the LLM is the one who is using is essentially it's processing, or his stochastic process, to say, I think it will be a good idea for me to use this function right now to like record something. So, and that's why like everybody is exploding on this, because this is it. Like this part here, the LLMs were already impressive, but the ability for them to essentially use tools to either, like you said, either get information or create or take an action. uh it's yeah, this is where it's at. So it's a wonderful time to be a software engineer.
Absolutely.
All right, and really that's I think that's as far as I want to push it.
Yeah,
Like,
no, that's a lot of ground.
yeah, like Spring AI has, tons and tons, and I think one of the things they are doing is they're still trying to decide which of all the quote unquote tons of way of doing things is the right way. But Like we went from not having an LLM running to essentially executing and creating not just an LLM, but actually putting in um, a tool that gives us like a function. We give our LLM a personality to say puns as part of the system prompt, and they are actually, and I didn't do it because it's too, but maybe they want the next advisor that we can do is they actually have a rack advisor. So the ability for and this is kind of like the thing what I was saying, like this used to be something that you still have to manually do in Spring AI at the beginning, where you have to figure out how you do your RAG. But now they're creating advisors that allows you to essentially retrieve those from a vector store. And and maybe that's what our next pop house is we just go dive into RAG and kind of like the vector space and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, because we didn't really talk too much about embeddings, and that's okay. That can be a topic in itself. But I mean, we definitely hit a lot of the topics on chat completion, and for most folks, that is where folks are looking at these apps is how can I replace some interaction that I would need an expert for, or maybe something repetitive where I have a set of documents that has all the information that you would need to answer said questions. The chat interfaces give you that, but once you start adding RAG, you can really start digging into kind of custom corpuses and custom knowledge bases and make it more finely tuned to whatever your use case is.
Yeah, it's super interesting. But yeah, like, like we said, like we went from essentially nothing to having a working RAG with streaming or not RAG, sorry, LM agent running in really less than an hour. And that is the impressive part. Like, kudos for Spring AI. There is, Spring is not your flavor of the day. There is Langchain4j, which offers similar capabilities. And there's even like other stuff that it's there is Llama CPP if you really want to go down to the wire.
Yeah.
But play with them and learn more about them. We're putting a lot of links on the stuff. Like I said, everybody is there's such a glut of like OpenAI not OpenAI, but essentially AI content. We just put our spin to it because we do it in the pub house format. And if you're already here, why not listen to us? But yeah, it's super easy to start getting into like, prompt engineering and all these other stuff. So with that, I think we are done with another episode of Pub House.
I agree. Yep. No, the AI landscape has a lot of different things to talk about, and we are all about covering that in the job of the show. You know what? You don't need to be a Python developer to be doing AI.
Oh yeah, not anymore. All right. Happy programming, everyone. This is Freddie signing off.
Bob signing off.
All right. We did it.
We did it. Yeah, that was